Well, good afternoon. Thank you for staying with us. I hope that you found this morning's conversation particularly fruitful. My name is Jerry Boyle. I am the Managing Director of Economic Development in the Community Development and Policy Studies Division here at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. And I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to get us started on this afternoon's panel. As you heard this morning, the whole idea behind this series of meetings is to try to explicitly connect place-based, neighborhood-based development with regional economies and what's happening with regional thinking in metropolitan areas around the country. And as Chris explained, we wanted to do that explicitly by having that national discussion about the overarching themes that tie a lot of these discussions together around the country, but then actually to break off into regional discussions to see where, if at all, we have a discontinuity in that conversation, that maybe we do need to have something clearly different on the West Coast than we have here in the Midwest or in the Southeast. So that's what we're striving to do. And I will point out that in addition to all of the things that Dan Sullivan pointed out about the work that we've done specifically on labor markets here, a couple of years ago, the Federal Reserve System also partnered with the Brookings Institution to do a national study on areas of concentrated poverty, where we looked at specifically what the impact of the double burden of living in poverty while surrounded by poverty does to families in those communities. And one of the clear themes that emerged from that was the whole concept of isolation. Not just the traditional sense of isolation of being located on the wrong side of the tracks, but if you're in one of these areas of concentrated poverty, you are isolated from the better educational institutions. You are isolated from the opportunities for good jobs. You are isolated from the more robust social networks that are needed for both children and families to be able to advance and to be able to gain greater access to greater opportunities. So while I was listening to this discussion this morning, I was very much reminded of that is one of the things that we are going to be trying to do here, is to sort of break through some of that isolation that we see in communities throughout the country, whether it's big urban communities with concentrated poverty in neighborhoods, or whether you're on Indian reservations or in rural communities where the isolation is geographically more obvious, but in some ways we don't really understand the full dynamics of that isolation on children and families living in poverty. So we hope that these things will be addressed in our series, and therefore it is particularly a welcome opportunity for us at the Federal Reserve to be able to establish this partnership with the Institute for Comprehensive Community Development. It's a logical extension of our long-standing partnership with the Local Initiative Support Corporation to be addressing these kinds of issues, especially around getting greater access to, in the Fed's case, equal opportunity and equal access to credit in those neighborhoods. LISC does that on a number of other levels as well. So we look forward to continuing with that partnership both here and around the country. And we also want to make sure that we recognize our other partner in this, the Urban Institute, that's been providing some of the background information that Chris shared with us this morning, and that will be working on some of the background information in our later panels. So with that, thank you again for being here, and I'd like to turn this over to Eileen Fiegel with the Institute for Comprehensive Community Development.
Okay, I'm Eileen Fiegel, as Jerry said, and it's my pleasure to introduce our afternoon panel. Our moderator is Paul O'Connor, who is an urban strategist with SOM and previously worked on regional issues with Metropolis 2020 and was a founding executive director of World Business Chicago. Howard Snyder is the executive director of the Northwest Side CDC in Milwaukee. That organization promotes entrepreneurship and also focuses on business retention and expansion. And Will Edwards is an assistant commissioner with the City of Chicago's Department of Housing and Economic Development. And Will is responsible for developing relationships with area businesses in order to provide opportunities for residents to have good living wage jobs. Please join me in welcoming our panel.
Thank you very much. I guess we'll, if this is as good as our, these conversations, phone conversations to make sure everybody's got their script right in advance. And so if this is half as good as the telephone conversation we had trying to set up this meeting, this should be an interesting dialogue, which we want to get the audience in early on. So at some point when we exhaust ourselves, which will probably be in 15 minutes, then we'll go to you guys and you can spark us back up. I'm just going to participate as opposed to just be a dealer here, as we've agreed. And I just would like to get a couple of prejudices of mine on the table, I guess. I think that spatial mismatch is a hollow concept. I mean, I think that it came out of the race riots of the 60s, LA and Chicago and Newark, and someone sort of started writing papers then to document two obvious facts that have been going on for at least a century, and that is poor people are here and good jobs are there. It's always the way it is. It's always the way it's been. Thank you very much. And so I think what we've had now is like 40 years in search of two facts in search of a theory. And so like it's still going on. So it's apparently the gift that keeps on giving from a policymaker's point of view. The other prejudice I have is on the regional notion, which I think in recent years has become very powerful and an article of faith among policy thinkers. And to me, my objection to it is that it covers, it makes it easy to ignore the inner city. The statistics look better, everything looks better when you blast them out to the CMA or the MSA. Those things look good, but it doesn't solve anybody's problems, really, in my view. And I think that it really just is a distractor. The notion of spatial mismatch is that here's the match, not lit, here's the fuse, not lit. You bring them together, something's supposed to happen. Well, guess what? Nothing happens because they both require an altered state. And the altered state is fire, and fire is, in this case, I think, mutual benefit, which is one of the things that Juan was talking about in his session about his operation, and which Byron also talked about a good deal. The issue of jobs and people, well, people have always followed the jobs. New development in the past 10 or 15 years has been capital is starting to follow the best jobs. The best qualified people are starting now to attract capital. This is what's happened with downtown Chicago, that they had to follow Motorola. That workforce saying, well, no, I'm not going to spend 4 hours a day in my car. Thank you very much. To get to Schaumburg or to get to Harvard, Illinois. And so you have to come to me, which they've been doing. And that's part of the resurgence of downtown. So and that's, you see that in the statistics we saw in advance, which were that on the higher end jobs, financial services, technical, real estate, finance, those kind of things, that they're doing great in the core city. So the problem, I think, is the intervention question. Is like how do you identify the key people and institutions in business and social services and the civic committee who will come together and collaborate consistently over time. A lot of what we do is just like we keep reinventing this stuff over and over and over again, which shows how smart we are and that how fast we change our governments, but we just don't keep at the work. Howard's going to tell us about how you keep a job and how you work a problem over the long term, because you've been engaged in your community for so long.
How I keep my job.
No. Yeah, how do you keep your job? So, everybody wanted to know, he's still around?
I think he's still around.
Okay, great. So, but it's, so I think the issue is the mutual benefit that we all have talked about. And at some point, I'd like to get into this Workforce Investment Board stuff, which we got good kudos on because it may be being dismantled by the politicians of DC who aren't giving us any money to sustain the system that we've built, and then talk about manufacturing works as well. But my prejudices aside, what do you bring jobs to the neighborhood? You've been in your neighborhood 30 years, right? or what? How's this work? Do you bring jobs to the neighborhood? The neighborhood, goes to the jobs? You have 60,000 people who need jobs, right?
Yeah, probably more.
Okay.
First, I want to say thank you to Jerry and to Eileen. And I thought that the first panel was terrific, and it was really well facilitated. And Juan is my new personal hero. I want to be you when I grow up. I guess yesterday was Father's Day, and I wasn't really sure what spatial meant when I first heard it, but I told my kids yesterday that they were all spatial to me. So.
See, there we are. I think that's what it's all about.
What can I say? It's like really tough being the speaker right after lunch. We got to keep you guys from falling asleep. No, I heard about reverse commute. Was it like in the 80s? And we were working with Goodwill Industries of southeastern Wisconsin, which is the largest Goodwill in North America, and now took over the Chicago Goodwill. And they were running buses and all kinds. And I just think that that's crazy. Didn't want to spend my time. I was telling Lynn when we were sitting there together that Super Shuttle seems to have figured out how to deal with the ups and the downs. Maybe there's a business on the reverse commute side. But it just wasn't really very interesting to me. I really thought that if we could grow the neighborhood economy, we would do a lot better than trying to transport people out to the suburbs. Plus, eventually, they'd end up living there. Maybe it would take a generation, maybe two, but they always say that housing patterns follow school patterns, and so if you end up building schools out in the outer part of the city, eventually people would begin to migrate in that direction. And I learned that as an organizer, and so when I started thinking about reverse commuting, I went, I don't want people in this community to move out of here. If people want to, that's fine, but I'm not going to try to facilitate it.
That's great. Well, so you have a different view. I mean, Will does in terms of working a big region, which is the city of Chicago, and connecting people to jobs there. I mean, do you think there's a problem connecting? I mean, we have like 4 million cars and 8 million driver's licenses. Like what's
Right.
the connection problem?
No, I think there's an absolute difficulty, as we talked about and heard earlier, in connecting people to jobs, but I think it's really about the skills mismatch. I think that it all goes back to, at some point in time, I'm sorry. What I was saying is I think there's an absolute difficulty in matching people to jobs, but I think it's more about the skills mismatch than it is about the issue of not being able to get to the jobs. People always find a way to get to the jobs. And in Chicago, and my view is a bit prejudiced because we're in Chicago, and Chicago's made a valiant effort to try to create jobs in the communities, try to protect those jobs and those companies that reside in the communities, and we're trying to make better matches of the individuals in those communities to those jobs. To the earlier speaker, when he talked about Austin, there are a couple attempts currently, and we're working currently with Juan Salgado and others in the room to try to create better partnerships. It's all demand-driven, and it has to be about what the employers need. And I think that the spatial piece it exists, not so much so for us.
So you have a big incubator that you've talked. Tell us a little bit about the incubator up in your area, like 600,000 square feet or something.
We were in a CDC like a lot of other CDCs around the country. We did everything. We played well with no one. We owned really a boatload of commercial and industrial real estate until the middle 90s, and then we were poor property managers like most CDCs, and we had a crash. Sold everything off within about 4 or 5 years. We actually made a fair amount of money and sat on it, which was nice, and invested it, and then moved into a Navy defense contractor's building who happened to be the largest manufacturer in the neighborhood. They're in a 600,000 square foot building, and they gave us half of it and said, do whatever you want, charge really cheap rent, just bring lots of people in. that are interested in co-locating with a Navy defense contractor. What was interesting about it was that they became the largest generator of the hiring of jobs in the neighborhood. They started hiring people right and left, and they said, well, we want to hire people from the neighborhood, but we don't know how to do it. And I found as a community organizer, when somebody tells you they don't know how to do something, that's the sweet spot. That's exactly where you need to move. Your opportunity is to help somebody to do something that they can't do. I didn't want to employ 4 or 5 or 6 people to do workforce if I could get a major, a Fortune 500 defense contractor to do all of that. They have HR. I don't need to do that kind of work. They have union. They're just a terrific business, and they had all the infrastructure so that the nonprofit didn't have to do it. And we found that the nonprofit didn't have to do a lot if you made strategic alliances with people who did. So you didn't need to have 15 or 20 people on your staff to do what you were getting the private sector to do or your partner to do. Now you have to end up with contracts, and a relationship's is only as good as the contracts eventually that you have or the loans. We ended up lending the defense contractor almost $600,000 to build a wall that separated them from us. And we began the business of working together to, with, it's called DRS, Power and Controls Technologies, to work with DRS to bring new businesses in, to lend money to the people who we were bringing into the building, to provide work. I'm on the WIB board in Milwaukee, to provide training and access to jobs, and then to take it outside of the neighborhood and to begin to build a cluster around power controls, of which we have a huge number of major corporations in Milwaukee who do that kind of work. So all of a sudden, I'm a community organizer one day, and I'm an expert in power conversion the next. And power conversion is how you take nuclear energy and turn it into electricity on a boat or on a ship, and that's what these guys did. Their customer was the Navy. And I'm going, I don't have any idea how I got myself into this, but it became a different kind of a model for doing economic development in probably the most distressed community in the state.
And so it's producing jobs? And so, I mean, is it continuing to produce jobs, or?
DRS last year hired 51 people. They were all in machinist union. They pay decent, and they don't lay people off, which is really nice. Now we have a 25-year experience with the legacy company. It was an Eaton. I don't know if you know Eaton in Cleveland. This was the Eaton Navy Controls, and before that it was Cutler Hammer, and they were the biggest company in the neighborhood. So we always had somebody from that company on our board. So there was always a relationship.
And so but the people were qualified to take those jobs that you had ready access to in your neighborhood?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, and what level of skill would that be?
Most of the training took place was OJT.
Okay.
But the WIB had OJT dollars, and the company was thrilled to be able to pay people, or to have half the wages and salaries paid by the WIB. And the WIB was thrilled because they had a company. I mean, restaurant jobs are, it's like somebody said about grocery store jobs. I mean, I kind of grew up in the retail business, so I have a spot in my heart for retail. But you don't want to see adults, doing that kind of work, at least not forever. So the WIB was thrilled because they were able to show outcomes.
So, Will, maybe you tell the other side of the story. The Ford Supplier Park is a great, I think, story of finding the people, and that the governor of Illinois and the mayor of Chicago went to Jack Nasser, who was the CEO of Ford, and said, well, we can find you your bodies, and that was a key component of how'd you do it?
Well, I mean, it's a good story. It's an interesting story, and Juan was a key part of that. Juan Salgado with Instituto del Progreso Latino. I think big part of the theme for this morning has been about collaboration and successful partnership. And that project could not have come together without that successful partnership. We utilize many community-based organizations across the city of Chicago to actually find individuals that met a specific skill level and then tried to train them to the specific skill levels of those manufacturers going to occupy the Supplier campus. And it was not only was it a great project, I think it set the stage for a lot of the work that IPL is currently doing, a lot of the work that a lot of organizations are currently doing, because it took us from just the training for the sake of training, and we had been doing demand-driven kind of customized training beyond that, well before that, but this was kind of the test case that put everybody on the map, all these organizations on the map, and said, look, we have now a success story to be able to tell behind taking individuals who are here and bringing them to here. And, you know, the tools that we use through KeyTrain and just basically ACT products to be able to assess individuals and be able to train them to a specific set of criteria for those employers, it was huge. And the real focus of this was not training. The real focus of it was, how do we employ individuals that live in the city of Chicago to maximize the investment of $150 million that the city was putting into the plan overall? And I think that what we were able to prove is that, you know, you can do it, you can identify individuals with skill set, but it has to be here to here. And that's the challenge in the workforce development world. It can never be here to here.
So did the neighborhood people find you, or what? I mean,
No,
did you beat the
no.
drums, or what?
Yeah. We beat the drums. We had the faith-based organizations out there in the community beating the drums, the community-based organizations, and I heard a lot of that this morning through successful collaboration, being able to work with those faith-based orgs, I think that really are the key organizations that touch individuals and bring them up to here before WIA can actually serve them. You know, WIA has a very finite life to it and the individuals that they can serve. And so somebody's got to help those individuals get to the place where they can enter that door. And we work with a lot of those organizations to do that, as well as Mayor Daley's WorkNet Chicago, which is the WIA recipient of funds.
But then, Howard, you had another opportunity that's beyond your sort of immediate geography in sort of the same skill area, right? Is it the Marinette or
Marinette.
Marinette? What's the deal with Marinette? How's that fit into this? Because that's a distance off, right?
Yeah, Marinette is 4.5 hours from downtown Chicago. It's 3 hours from Milwaukee. And Lockheed Martin was one of the two defense contractors in the country that got a contract from the Navy to build what's called the Littoral Combat Ship. Littoral is, they're actually, well, it's over a 300-foot boat, but it has a very low draft. And I go, you know, people go, well, how can you support something like this? And I say, they chase pirates. You know, I mean,
Who could be against that?
who can be against, you know, chasing pirates in Somalia? But that's what they do. It's a very fast. There's only 40 sailors on the ship. The ship has 2 crews and 2 captains, which is kind of interesting. And I helped DRS raise the money for a commissioning. It was the first ship that was commissioned in the Great Lakes since World War II, and the first one in Wisconsin. And all their power controls equipment was on this ship. And then the Navy made an order for 20 more, 10 of them in Marinette and 10 of them, I think, in Texas. Marinette is right at the border between the UP, Upper Peninsula, Michigan, and Wisconsin. It's just an hour north of Green Bay. So they have a shipyard up there, and people started saying, so we helped to build this ship. People were employed in the plant. They went and hired a bunch more people in order to do that. And I started scratching my head and said, 10 more ships, 3 hours away, how do I drive jobs into Milwaukee? Because it's still 3 hours. 3 hours is a long way away, and even on like supply chain, it's really tough to get key suppliers and to be able to turn it into a job 2, 3, or a couple hundred. Yeah. So the job that we have taken on ourselves is to say there's going to be 10 ships. They've already done 3, so it's going to take another 10, 15 years. How are we going to drive more Navy business into the city of Milwaukee that just has this one defense contractor?
And so what routes are you pursuing to make that happen?
Well, like we say, Google it.
Okay,
Be-
we all say that.
We all say that. I used to write grants with pen and pencil. I mean, now today everything is on Google. I mean, you need to go out and you need to find who are the subcontractors. There are MB and WB requirements. And so there are links to make, because you find a lot of times the subcontractors and the prime contractors are lazy. And they don't want to go and find a lot of people that they may need to find. And so I have the time, I'll go find people if there are people who are located in Milwaukee. Now, it's not the same thing as building a widget. When you're building something for the nuclear navy, it's got to work. There's no margin for error, and a lot of these people really qualify their subcontractors, and it's really serious. It's not like food vendors or some of these other things where the stakes aren't either quite as high, or it's not difficult bar to get over. So then you start training, you start looking at opportunities for those people to be able to work in a really different field than they're used to working in. So there's all kinds of opportunities. Everywhere you go, you ask a question, there's another opportunity for the nonprofit to be able to play in that space.
Great. I mean, it's one of the issues that came up this morning. It's the fundamental issue of supply and demand, if you will. Like in Chicago has, as of April, I guess, maybe sooner, 418,000 unemployed people in the region, 400,000 unemployed people, and at least 150,000 jobs open. The other thing that we saw that was touched on a little bit this morning was the critical skills shortage. Because for 20 years in manufacturing, we've seen high-level skills always in demand, no matter how bad the economy was. So, and so the employers are hungry, I guess, and in other times they're more hungry, as was also pointed out this morning. But what's the issue here? So we've got huge number of people wanting jobs, huge number of people with open jobs. Spatial mismatch, or what? What's mismatching? Is it just skills?
I mean, when you say just...
Not just the skills.
When you say, yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Because my comment was going to be, when you say just skills, there's a whole lot missing there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everything from the needed occupational education, to the real connection to post-secondary, to even earlier in schools with people. The mentoring program that was spoken about earlier, excellent opportunity to try to lead people towards that path. The workforce development system has this huge task that just honestly can't be done. Workforce development is asked to take individuals wherever they stand and whatever they've missed throughout their life through education and form them and fit them to this job. Forget it. It doesn't happen. It's not going to happen. The only way we're going to do this is to be able to loop around from demand, identifying just-in-time labor market information to be able to project over a period of time. And mind you, I'm not talking about JTPA CETA days when we just said, oh, these are the jobs, let's train people for them, go out and get that great job. I'm talking about really through a really serious process, identifying where the opportunities are, where they're going to exist for a longer period of time, and how we move people to those opportunities that do have those career ladders attached to them.
Right. We did that. I mean, we tried to keep manufacturing alive for 20 years, and that this was for real in Chicago. And we had the GAO here, I guess ourselves, 2 weeks ago, and they were writing us up our system, and particularly focused on Manufacturing Works, which is the one-stop for manufacturing that operates out of Instituto. And then they went on to Instituto and got full immersion baptism over there. But that there's a really stuff to really talk about the nature of the development of that relationship. But it's the political arena had written off for manufacturing in the United States, that it was all China. Okay, just as it's all been Mexico before, Japan before that, but U.S. last year manufactured 45% more value than China. Okay, like way more than China did. But we had a hell of a fight to keep it alive, the notion of it alive, so that even though those jobs were empty the whole time. So, and then we have the thing with like healthcare everybody talks about, which is currently jammed up because of the same issue that came up this morning, which is people not, because of the financial crisis, not moving out as quickly as we thought they would. But I think we have a fairly good sense of what the future should be if you don't listen to the Illinois Department of Employment Securities, which has always projected bogus projections of what was going to be the future jobs, because they never showed up for one. But anyway, so how do we get the system to respond to common sense?
Well, I think that you just don't listen.
Okay, I agree with you.
I mean, what's the point of getting out of bed in the morning and thinking about how you're going to deal with the problems of 418,000 families in the Chicago area? I just deal with little problems. I can't deal with big problems. There's a lot of really smart people in this room who think about and write about and get paid to think about big problems. That's not me, my organization, or too many people that I know. There's a lot of really good news that's actually out there in urban communities. I was writing it down. I mean, we've made a lot of progress in crime prevention. We've made a lot of progress in education. We have kids that are graduating high school and going on to college that didn't 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. College graduation rates are way up in minority communities. The teen pregnancy is way down. Healthcare, a lot of things that are going on in the neighborhood is like really good. There's a lot of really good stuff that's going on, which in a lot of ways gets unreported, but there's a lot of good news that's out there in the neighborhood. Job creation's not one of them. Job creation's tough, and I don't think that human service professionals have done a particularly good job of dealing with issues of either working to create new jobs, working with business to create new jobs out of small businesses, retaining larger businesses. I think that it's really tough, and it's the one, I don't believe in like one block at a time, one child at a time. And you'll die before you ever get to any kind of number that makes any sense. But I think that on the job side, it is one job at a time or a couple of jobs at a time, and it is one area where we could be working with individuals, with families, and with companies and bringing them together, whether it's through training or even through financing small business. We're what's called a CDFI, or a Community Development Finance Institution. We lend a lot of money to small businesses and some large businesses. And then we have skin in the game both on the training side and on the business development side. But there's a lot of good news out there, but this is the one area that I think has eluded a lot of us.
Pick it up.
I don't disagree at all. I think you're absolutely right. The city is undertaking a grant through the Economic Development Administration where we're looking at Chicago's sustainable industries and trying to figure out through land use policy, through resources for those businesses, how we kind of lay fertile ground. Because as I see it, this kind of all starts with demand, and well, I should say starts with education and ends with demand. And the demand being the businesses that create those jobs. If you create that skill-based skill set that Chicago can be known for, that the Midwest broadly is known for, then you'll draw more companies. You will draw more opportunities. And I think because of the way we're uniquely positioned, because of the fact that we have companies that are currently located throughout our neighborhoods and that we're not New York, no disrespect to New York, but we don't have a, oh, okay, well, that's, whether or not, I mean, we've created a situation where, our city is not going to be all, real estate property. It's not going to be all living space. It's going to be a place where individuals can live and work. And I think that because of that, we've uniquely positioned ourselves to be very, very successful at attracting businesses to the city. The larger project, CSI, is about kind of creating that fertile ground so that companies can make a decision to come and locate in those areas.
You've got about, according to the data we all got in advance of today, there's about 16% of the manufacturing jobs are close to Chicagoans that are in the region. And so for 100 years, it's been literally greenfielding and greenfielding and greenfielding, and the jobs have followed the manufacturers out there, and the manufacturers are still out there. So there was a quick reference this morning to CMAP, a couple quick references I think Byron mentioned. Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, which is the first regional plan that we've got since Burnham. And the notion for them is that you increase densities along transit corridors, but that in order for them to succeed, two things have to happen. One, you draw that barrier out there, the green barrier that you need environmentally, but the other part is to redevelop the core. And so that's a sort of a potential ally that we have as a region to force that policy issue. It's a state animal. Sort of losing my thought here. Pick it up.
You want to know? All right. Okay, so.
No, whatever.
So no, that's fine.
Sorry, like I'm having Alzheimer's.
I mean, the fact that we're looking at, increasing densities within these areas and communities, and I mean, they're looking at it from an economic perspective. What's going to make the region work? I think a lot of the comments this morning were around, how do we take people from these, economically depressed communities and not relocate them, but transport them to where the jobs are. Well, I think that's backwards. I think, what we do is say, how do we create more jobs in these areas? And how do we build these areas up? What are they uniquely positioned to do and do well? And how do we provide the kind of skill set necessary to make these people attractive to the companies? Okay. Companies are in the business of making money. They're not in the business of offering people jobs and opportunities. And so I think there's got to be a give on both sides. Believe me, I'm not saying that. And the truth be told, a lot of the people in this room who head up and work with a lot of community-based organizations and those job training organizations know. They walk into a company or business, and when they get that light switch turned on and that individual says, yes, I'll look at your people, the first thing they ask is, okay, give me that job description. Well, that job description doesn't match. I mean, it's 12, 15 years old. It doesn't match the skill set they need in the person. And one of the things they'll tell you is, just send me somebody who can breathe. I can show them how to work. Well, guess what? It doesn't work like that. And so there's a bit of work that has to be done specifically with those businesses to bring them up to speed, to kind of have them understand, well, this is what you need to really attract the kind of people.
Right, I think there's also a fundamental breakdown in the sort of the business mentality, which is they're married to Adam Smith, and that this is like doctrine, and so that if there are job openings and you will pay enough, the job will be filled.
Right.
Okay, well,
Right.
wrong. Right. And so it's very difficult to communicate to very significant and smart business people that the system doesn't work according to these mechanisms.
Just did again a little Google search. A couple of weeks ago, I was in a debate with a guy from a very extreme right-wing CEO who's also very charming and entertaining and gets lots of laughs, and so it was pretty one-sided. Since he had all the answers and got all the funny jokes in. But if you took the 7 states that touch the Great Lakes and include Ohio, because Iowa, because we all like Iowa a lot. You had I'm not sure if I have it correct, but it was 1/6 of the population and 1/5 of the GDP of the United States, and the population, the GDP was interestingly was equal to the German GDP and German population. Now, if you took Midwestlandia and took those 7 states and put it out in the middle of the Pacific, you would start thinking about workforce development totally differently, because we're just a huge competitive region. We need to be attached to one another, and in Wisconsin, we gave away $850 million worth of train funds so that it could come to Chicago.
Thank you.
So I appreciate it. And it does seem to be the playbook. These new governors are giving away the dollars, but it's not just trains. It's internet. It's every way, and it's roads.
Universities.
It's I mean, we have to be able to do that. And if you have 7 Big Ten universities, why not make it so that, you know, somebody from Wisconsin can go to the University of Illinois, or somebody from the University of Illinois can go to Indiana, or they're all good schools, but, you know, I mean, there's an outflow of, we have reciprocal agreement with Minnesota, and there's an outflow of Wisconsin kids that go to the University of Minnesota. And there's nothing wrong with the University of Wisconsin. I went to school there, and pretty good football team too. But yet we're not thinking regionally, and if you don't think regionally, then your workforce strategies don't make sense, because if somebody came from Chicago and said to me, guess what? The city of Milwaukee is not pulling its weight in this regional strategy because your public schools have 50% of the kids are gone by the time they're in the 12th grade. And I would do something about it, but but people in Illinois are taking jobs away from people in Wisconsin. Wisconsin's trying to take jobs away from people in Michigan, and I don't get it. Making people poor in Rockford in order to give somebody a job in Wisconsin, to me, makes absolutely no sense.
Right, but that's politics, and so the issue that if we're not going to solve this problem politically, because, especially on the workforce side, because my experience is, and I'm the chairman of the local workforce board, is it's all about press releases. And that's the only thing that the politicals care about is a press release on workforce stuff, really, to get things done. But if you took the region that you're describing and you add in Ontario and Quebec, you're north of $2 trillion. And I think one of the sort of interesting criticisms of the Fed, of Chicago Fed on the region, and it's lagging, that we didn't export more to the outer world, but that we, as a trade area, are enormously robust. And we have lots of things in common in terms of our manufacturing, automotive, and all those kind of things. The one thing I'd really like to do, and maybe we'll start opening this up to the floor. It occurred to me when I was listening to the first session that the New Communities program has, of LISC here in Chicago, really has kind of the mechanism, may have the mechanisms, there's so many of you here, maybe we could talk about that, of the methodologies of talking to each other, of putting a dialogue together to explore possibilities. And that it is the place which connects a lot of that federal money coming together into one locale, social services, education, economic development, other kinds of things, housing money. So they have sort of robust capabilities. And then when Byron sort of sparked off the notion of, why don't you define your own, to me anyway, why don't you define your own region? So is there an adequate sort of infrastructure here of the new communities and other sort of interested parties, an act of social will rather than an act of political will or organizational will, to start making something big happen? Because to me, the problem has always been one of scale. And, so before we sort of open that up, which I really think would be a good area of discussion, maybe I could turn to Juan for a second about the relation. You could talk a little bit about manufacturing works, and you touched on this a little bit, but the relationship that has developed between, I'll just back up 1 second, is Chicago has this very strange and unique and good system of community-based workforce investment strategies, and one-stops and then alternatives that are a fairly good network that covers a lot of geography. We're not going to be able to sustain this in the future if the federal cuts keep this way, so it's about to fall apart, I guess. But one of the great things we did do was, in the sectoral approach, was to do Manufacturing Works Center, and maybe you could talk to us about the relationship between the center and the employers and how you have moved them along in terms of the level of skills that has benefited the employers at least as much as the employees.
Sure. Well, I'm supposed to speak in that. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the one critical decision point is, who do you work with? And we talked about rewards. So, we work with with the high road employers, with the employers that really engage you. We say, we're not going to work with you if we can't go down to your shop floor, if we can't talk to your supervisors, if we don't know who's going to train. You talked about the union example, right? Why so many minorities drop out of their apprenticeship programs. Part of it is the guy training them might not want to be training them, right? Which is a big reason why they drop out. So what we're trying to do is engage the employer and understand that we're here for the long haul. And the tools that we have available are tools that we care about your growth. That's the other message. We're here for the long haul. We care about your growth. We can facilitate other resources coming to the table, whether it's OJT, whether it's tax credits, whether it's incumbent worker training, right? I mean, we can bring the system to you, and the system does have a lot of value adds, and you don't have to worry about the paperwork. Our partners will worry about the paperwork. And so it's making things easier for that employer, but the right employer. You don't want to make things easier for the folk that's just going to use the system, only for their
Maybe you
benefit.
just talk a little bit about in the early days, the notion was that you'd go and the employer would say, give me somebody for $9 an hour, and your staff has really brought the companies up to the point where they say, look, what you really need is this job, and it's $17 an hour.
Yeah, well, that's part of the challenge is, and so we've given them labor market information. I mean, part of the reason why they can't find the right people is they're not paying enough, right? And so they just need to understand that that part of the equation. But the other part, and it goes to what Will said, is that what they know is they got a person that's been doing the job. They don't necessarily know what the job is, and so one of the resources we provide is to come in and actually help them to build the job description that really, with the worker that's there, that really helps them understand what the total job is. Once they see that, then all of a sudden it's a $3 an hour more, pay, per hour. And now I can get the right person for that job because now I, as an employer, understand it a lot more. And so they've been busy making product. They got the right person to make the product. They need to find somebody, but in order to do that, they really need to know what is required.
Just want to add anything? Comments? Because I'd like maybe to turn to Jim, and then, go ahead.
I'd just like to lift up another model in Chicago that's relatively new. But the Center for Labor and Community Research worked with Chicago Public High Schools to develop Austin Polytechnic High School. And it graduated its first class, so it's 4 years old, graduated its first class in June. Manufacturers that a CLCR has been working with over the years built out a $200,000 training facility in the high school. They provided job shadowing and internships for students. It's a pre-engineering curriculum, so students can either go to college or get some kind of post-secondary education or go to work for the manufacturers. Students graduate with at least one industry-recognized certification. Some are graduated with 3. When the parents toured the facility, the parents said, this is great that you're preparing my child for a job, but I don't have a job. And so CLCR is working on a training program that they plan to roll out in the fall for parents to come into the high school in the evenings to be trained in higher skilled manufacturing, it's usually CMC. And I think the other thing that is good about this model for young people, that it is not only exposing them to work in a field where they can earn a family supporting wage, but letting them know that they can also be owners of these companies. And I think that's when we're talking about really creating some wealth in low-income communities.
That's great. We also just started a first class of the charter for high school for healthcare. Just began now, just the new one. So I just want to turn to Jim to start getting into the how do you do this, how do you connect the dots discussion.
Turn the mic on. Thank you. I have 2 overarching themes in my brain after this morning, and this afternoon as well. And the first one is this whole idea about collaboration. Somebody actually mentioned the words before Howard did. I knew Howard would, but community organizing. And Deborah just gave us an example in the same neighborhood where Bob talked about a failure earlier. And the difference, I think, is Dan Swinney is an old organizer and understood how to go out and get into relationship with those manufacturers before the fact. Probably before anybody even suggested a high school. Just to understand them, understood what they need. Howard told 3 compelling stories. You know, every time somebody says they don't know how to do something, there's an opportunity. But you have to be in a conversation to hear what they don't know how to do. At the base of it, that's what relational organizing is. That's what we at NCP in Chicago, and Joel could speak more eloquently about this, call the platform, which is an infrastructure of relationships in a geography. It could be a neighborhood, it could be a region of the city. That is best left to find to people who are doing the work and what they're after. But I mean, what Juan is deploying so well is good old-fashioned relational organizing technique. Would you agree, Juan? Yes. Yeah, with that. It's not new, it's not rocket science. We heard from Houston about IAF, we heard from Boston about IAF. That stands for Industrial Areas Foundation, founded by Saul Alinsky from Chicago, and that's where relational organizing was invented. So that, it seems to me, I was thinking, God, it's interesting, things that are old become new again. And so we're circling around to basics, that without a relational infrastructure, there is no community. Because communing isn't about geography, it's about relationships. Neighborhood is about geography. Let me get the second one out, Paul, okay? The second one that's in my head is about the spatial mismatch, the jobs at the periphery. I mean, we worked with Solo with Juan, and before that with Sweetheart Cup, before Solo gobbled up Sweetheart. We worked with Nabisco, we worked with Tootsie Roll, we worked with a lot of industrialists. I can tell you, after, it wasn't a year gone by after Nabisco put $300 million into their factory that they started getting quarterly calls from industrial real estate developers to go out to the periphery. And that there are a lot of people in that are not even part of this discussion. We talk about talking to the companies. Well, guess who is talking to the companies? The people who want to sell them real estate. And they're talking to them all the time. It's the same kind of, I think, force in our economy that led to so many foreclosures. In the between 1990 and I think 2000, the number of people in the state of Illinois that made their living on the closing fees from people borrowing money for a mortgage increased by 400,000% as banks outsource that to mortgage brokers, right? So now you've got this whole economic force out there that's actually pushing the sprawl. Will said, quite rightly, that Chicago isn't just a place to live, but that's because of Bob Galoff in a former life when he was a Chicagoan, and Mary Bonone, who's sitting up here, and others. We have something called the Protected Manufacturing District. Actually, they changed it. It was politically correct to call it the Planned Manufacturing District. But the fight over Goose Island or the fight in Pilsen, we said, no, this is good land for jobs, and people need jobs. And so there's this whole kind of countervailing force of folks out there who are pushing transactions where nobody's making anything and nobody's employing anybody, but a lot of money is changing hands. And it's the same kind of mentality. I think that I can kind of tie it to the same kind of mentality that fueled the subprime lending frenzy and left us with the foreclosure debacle that somebody said, I think it was Bob said earlier today, well, you know, we haven't even seen the end of that, and it's got to work itself through. So there are these countervailing forces, and we tend to just kind of look inside. But the play, I think, is to be really good at what we do, but also be pretty good politically at stopping them.
Right. And I guess what I'm getting at in terms of trying to broaden the discussion, and maybe talk to Joel about this, is could you use, okay, you do your community grade, okay, another new community does its community grade. Is it possible to network those into a federation whereby you could start getting to scale? my problem, my great frustration personally on the workforce side has been like, great, 25 jobs at a time, they evaporate coming out of the training programs. But do you think you could use this mechanism to get to scale?
I think we can. I think, through our New Communities program, we say that we've created a platform and a network to deliver results. And we've done it around issues of education and around sports and around recreation and a whole slew of activities where there is this delivery system where locally based organizations with support have a network of relationships, like Jim was talking about, where they connect the dots, where they make those things happen. And so they're able to create an accountability system, they're able to be nimble and to react to opportunities on the ground, as well as to overcome some of those barriers. What has not been done is to do this on any scale in the economic development arena. And I think there is a real opportunity there. You, Paul, talked earlier about the fact that, you've got a fuse and you've got, what was it, the match. Well, I like to think of our New Communities program, the relationships there, as the accelerant. I mean, you've got to have something there. You've got to have oil to make the engine work. You've got to have something to ignite what's going on. I think creating that sort of system is really critical, because what I've been hearing all morning is there are a lot of individual efforts and a lot of individual programs that are going on, and some of them are good, and some of them are creating some success, and we've had some failures along the way, we've learned from it, but what there isn't in this world is a coordinated and integrated approach and a delivery system, and I think that's the real opportunity.
Not, go ahead.
Hey, Brad.
Power and wealth held in the hands of a few, that every not-for-profit in this room and every government agency in this room is dependent on somebody's goodwill to get your money. So that if you tick off XYZ Corporation, who's a big funder, your program doesn't exist. If in the Congress somebody says, we don't like XYZ programs anymore, your program doesn't exist. We talk about the employees the biggest employee group in the city of Chicago are the teachers. We don't treat them particularly well. We always were told that was the kind of position that you could always have a good job, whether there's problems with the standards, with tenure, with this or that. I mean, I'm not arguing for it, but I think that we as not-for-profits, good guys, and goodness knows I've spent even more years than Paul in this, trying one by one, little by little, but I really see it harder and harder, and that scale is something the other side sort of says, well, if you do better, you work harder, you get more people together. It's no longer an issue for the not-for-profits. It's really an issue of confronting, and I'd like to think that in the boardrooms they're talking about, isn't it weird that, I don't know if you saw Gretchen Morgan's column yesterday in the New York Times, companies are losing money, CEOs are the top suite of people are making more money than the company made. We don't have any control over that, and so that's my devil's advocate. I mean, I'm not for the teachers union, I'm just saying that we have to really look at this from the top, and yet day by day, I slug away, whether it's with microloans or other kinds of loans. I mean, I am little by little, each individual is going to get my full attention. But I know some guys just, or I do, just going to rip off what I'm doing by saying, just the way we now, we're for the teachers, we're for the nurses, we're for the healthcare workers, we're for public employees. When does it stop?
I couldn't agree more with what you just said. I have no idea what scale is, because it's never enough.
I know what a scale is. I don't like to get on it.
Yeah, right. I know how you feel, sister.
I feel like you gotta break it a little.
Yeah. But, it's just never enough, and if you have somebody else saying what scale is, whether it's an academic or government or, 418,000, I get 60,000 jobs that, that need to be filled in Milwaukee. I can't do that. I wouldn't even try. And like I said before, I couldn't even possibly get out of bed any morning thinking about scale. Now, here's the one thing that I think that we as not-for-profits can do, and that if you're just in this one bucket of workforce, I think you're missing a really big opportunity, because we do financing. So we're financing the businesses that we're also doing the job training for, and working with the big power companies in order to do the cluster. So it's a triangle. And if you can insert yourself in the middle of the triangle and say, look, we've just lent $600,000 to a small company, we better keep them alive. Oh, incidentally, they just created 16 or 17 jobs, and they're the people who we're putting out there as the new star of the cluster, of this energy cluster. Now you've become indispensable. And it isn't a question of scale, it's a question of you did something that nobody thought could be done, which is to put yourself in the middle of the triangle.
Yeah,
And
when the power company decides they want to raise rates, or they want to do something that's environmentally unfriendly, now are you compromised? I mean, I'm just,
I work in a defense building. I compromise all the time. Look at, do you think that I'm pro-military? You bet I am.
So, please, when you,
very, very complicated.
Mike, yeah.
Turn my microphone, you couldn't all hear me?
It's a pretty one-sided argument at the moment.
Do I have to start over?
No, we
No, I just think it's so complicated, but we have to, those of us, I went to a Micro Enterprise USA conference because I'm very interested in micro lending. Of the, 7 to 1, the people that were there was 1 actually making loans, 7 were academics, consultants, government. I mean, everybody was looking at the 1 or 2 people who do it. The practitioners, so that's one issue. But the issue really is, it's a larger issue. We who are doing, the on-the-ground work, talking to people, screaming at them, being screamed at, begging for them, loving them, hating them, whatever it is, we've got to continue that, but we've got to realize it's a political process, that it's Congress, it's the state Senate, it's the House, it's the mayor, it's the governor. All these people are not really interested in our one person. They're interested in winning an election. Either if they're CEOs, they're not interested particularly in the best thing for the community. They're best for their shareholders or their stockholders or themselves. And we've got to work very, very hard and accept that. And I don't know that we want to have, secret websites that we're talking, because I don't want XYZ Corporation to know what I'm thinking about them, because I want money from them.
No, I was just going to mention that, and forgive me, I don't remember the name of the young lady representing Polk Brothers Foundation today. The comment she made, Deborah, and the comments and the example she made around Austin Polytech. Austin Polytech was really born out of this collaboration that actually raised and developed CMRC, and looked at manufacturing, said manufacturing is not dead. But it was a group of people who came together. It was a collaborative effort. And I agree with you. I think that everybody wants what they want. And so Jim's comment around successful organizing and having someone who can bring everyone together and say, I know what you want, I know what you want, I know what you want. Now, you can all sit and play nice and smile at each other at the table, but at the end of the day, you only want what you want. And if I can bring that to those individual organizations, individual companies, individual stakeholders, then I'm doing my job. And I think that that is the challenge that exists. I totally agree with you. I think that it's a much larger issue, a much larger fight than just any of these silos that we've talked about. But all of these things that have been successful have had really serious champions. And those champions have been individuals who can kind of hold the flag and connect with all the different sources, whether it's sources for revenue, sources for talent, sources for the development necessary, whatever the case may be. I think that's the mix, that's the secret sauce. And to the extent that we can do that well and we continue these kind of conversations around what true collaboration is, I think we can get at some of it. But it is challenging. It is very, very difficult. And even in government, you got to sell it up. You got to sell it left, right. I mean, it's got to be sold. If you're doing a good job, then you can come up with some successes. And I think that the connection of education to an end outcome and goal of what these companies are actually asking for in a successful job applicant is really at the crux of this.
Yes, sir.
I think it's interesting. A lot of what we've been talking about is in part about point of view and how we approach problems. And Jim, as he talks about relational organizing and how, having been in part influenced by Jim, I've always thought of myself as, when I was a CRA officer, I was an organizer, a senior management team. Now that I work for a federal regulator, I'm an organizer of CRA officers, But Howard, you said something interesting. I thought you said that the Great Lakes states plus our brothers and sisters in Iowa constitute a population and a geographic, economic development area comparable to Germany. So why is Germany the industrial powerhouse of Europe, and we're the Rust Belt? Well, I mean, if we're generating this kind of economic activity and we have a similar population, so how is it that we look at Germany so differently than we look at ourselves?
Well, it was just an accident that the numbers happened to correlate. So,
But do you see the point I'm making?
Oh, sure,
is that
I do.
So it's like what's going on in Detroit right now. We could say that it's turning into open prairie, but at the same time it's being repopulated by people who are trying to come up with dynamic new ways of creating economic activity.
Well, the politics in this country are so toxic and poison that it's really difficult, as I'm sure you all know, since half of the legislators in the state of Wisconsin were hiding in Rockford. We have four-fifths of the state of Wisconsin detests 1/5. The three suburban counties of Chicago, the little bedroom community. I'm in the largest bedroom community in Chicago, Milwaukee, and then you have Racine and Kenosha, and the rest of the state just detests us because they think that they're paying for 4/5 of the problem that you have in the state is generated by, three counties, and that's like the biggest problem. It really is at the moment. It's impossible to overcome the political problem, but we'll have our day again. Not that we did so well in 2008 when we had our day, both nationally and state-wise. The problems didn't get better. They actually, they didn't get any better. Let's put it that way.
I'm not sure if you've read, but I just want to plug a book by someone, Dick Longworth's book entitled "Caught in the Middle." In that he talks a lot about the kind of regional issues that you were bringing up, and other members in the panel were confirming.
Right. I think that it's a great diagnostic. I mean, as a newspaper man, so he's going to
Right.
diagnose things. But the missing piece is the sense of identity. Of we have a common interest. We're all young. We're all little. I mean, Germany's been there for a while. So and they have their own states that are in competition to some extent. But we don't have an awareness of sort of what we have, what our assets are. And where I work, our big pro bono thing is the water, is like the Great Lakes, to try to develop a sense of, like, there is a sense of community here that drives that. But I think one of the issues is, I still go back to the same question, which is, it's a social issue, not a political issue. I think that it's an organizing issue, if you will, put it in those terms. Can we scale that cloud up? And I think, so like it's like new communities, as long as, you don't piss off MacArthur, like, okay, well, there's a big universe out there, okay? But can you, and Caparo's famous for, creative butt kissing, I mean, No, seriously. No, seriously. So because he knows, like, okay, really, well, really, you know, I was hoping maybe. But the notion that everybody's got what they want. I mean, so that the politicians want the press release.
That's right.
So fine, if that's all it takes to get the deal done is to give them the press release, give them the press release. Who cares about it? There's an element of sort of cold-blooded pragmatism, but can you scale up the clout in the current environment? Because if you left a government mechanism, I don't think it's going to work either.
I think the problem with creative butt kissing, and I love Jim, is that then they think they've done it, so they don't have to. If you're a better butt kisser than somebody else, and since he is one of the best, he got more goodies than other people. And it doesn't mean that other people didn't have programs and projects and things. Now, that's competition, and we'd say that's capitalism. But I don't think we can have overt coordination. I think we really do have to do social media much more with sharing and talking, and whether it's on, you know, something. I mean, I read everything. I'm on Michelle Bachmann's list. I'm on Sarah Palin's list. I'm on I love it. I mean, I'm going to Tea Party things this summer. I've got to learn, and we've got to, and I have to share what I'm learning. Because, you know, I'm old, I'm tired, I can do things you can't do, and what are they going to do to me? I mean, I don't
They can
have
do
a
a lot to you, Fran. Oh, let's not even go there. Okay,
nothing.
Joe?
Yeah. Well, I just want to reiterate, I mean, it is an organizing issue. That's what it is. I mean, we've got individual instances of some things that worked, some things that haven't worked. There isn't the political will. If we want to see something happen, there needs to be people organized around a common vision and some specific issues that they can, and a strategy that they can implement. And that means bringing key stakeholders to the party. I mean, that's something we did in the New Communities program, but it didn't start with us. That started, 35 years ago when, a lot of folks grew out of the community organizing movement. But one of the key principles is you need somebody to lead that effort, and you need people to support it. You need key stakeholders in the game. But that's the issue of scale. You find something that works and you grow it, but you build the constituency around it, so you are creating the political will to go along with it, and that's what needs to happen.
Sure.
Just a couple of observations that I have to premise with these opinions are mine and not necessarily that of the Federal Reserve. But in my world, Jim is famous for something much different than what was described earlier. When I came out of school, I was trained by people like Jim and Joel and Lynn Cunningham, and not just me, but there were probably 20 or 30 people who we could identify that were trained at approximately the same time at, among other things, loan packaging. We were specifically trained at how to help a small business on a commercial main street put together a package that they could bring into a bank. And there were people at the major downtown banks in a program called the Neighborhood Lending Program. They trained us on what they wanted to see. The city's Department of Planning and Development trained us on what they wanted to see for packaging loans that would help do facade renovations on those commercial main streets. All of the infrastructure that was needed then to help the small businesses in those communities resided in the nonprofits that we worked in. And then one day, Governor Edgar decided that small business development centers didn't belong in community development corporations anymore, moved them into community colleges, and suddenly the strength of the loan packaging function in the CDCs atrophied. I wasn't really aware of that atrophy until, in the recent crisis, people started announcing major funding for small business initiatives, whether it was the Goldman announcement or the city announcement or the CDFI announcement. And I was on the phone with some national leaders who said, one of those entities looked at Chicago and said, they can't get the money out on the street. And I insisted on that phone call that I know exactly the people to call who can put together that network for you tomorrow and get that money flowing. Until I talked to somebody who said, you know what, you're 15 years removed from that network no longer exists. The capacity that was available at the neighborhood level through CDCs no longer exists. So that's one of the networks that I think people want to see that did exist and now doesn't. The second network that I think is being overlooked here, even though I think it may have been one of the purposes of this convening, is to even get beyond those neighborhood level networks that don't exist yet, or the infrastructure within a city to put people together like that, to say, you know, when I left the CDC and went to work for Arlington Heights, relative to the people that I worked with in the CDC or in the city, I might as well have been working on the North Slope. I had no relationship other than when we played racquetball or something. No relationship with those CDCs anymore. There was no real tie to what I had been doing in my prior life when I was doing that. And then both in Arlington Heights and when I returned to work for the city of Chicago, our only relationship with Wisconsin was when Forward Wisconsin would lob a bombshell by way of an announcement of all of the businesses that they were soliciting from Illinois to move to Wisconsin. We had to figure out which of the businesses in our geography we had to tenaciously approach and say, what are your needs? What do we need to do to keep you here? But other than that, there was no discussion about how great it would be to have Milwaukee and Chicago working together to try and attract Boeing or any other manufacturing entity. So the network capacity at all of those levels may have existed, may not have, may be a pipe dream, but you know, who are the organizers who can transcend some of that, to go beyond the community organizing to build the Polytechnic, but then to be able to say, how do we do 10 of those between here and Green Bay?
Jim, and then Juan, and then I'd like Will to talk about the CSI, okay?
So what set up the world so that Jerry Boyle could enter it when he left college to learn about loan packaging? In 1972, we, and I'm going to proudly say we, through an organization called NPA, took over the HUD building on Wacker Drive, and because we shut them down, we didn't have to come and take over the Federal Reserve building. But that was next on the target hit list. Why? Because redlining was rampant. And then a guardian angel named Senator William Proxmire from the state of Wisconsin sponsored something called the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, which allowed us to prove that redlining went on, which then allowed us to organize to pass CRA. And we've been skating on CRA for a very long time.
Right.
Because there's been a whole lot of money pointed at this stuff. But there are still some, so earlier I said things old become new again. I don't know if this is being recorded or not, but I'm really pissed off about foreclosures. And right at the time when Bank of America selected my organization as, I can't remember the name of it, Neighborhood Excellent Community Builder Award, which meant $200,000 grant, they bought Countrywide, or assumed Countrywide, which had the largest number of foreclosures in our neighborhood. We called them up and said, we want you to take the money back. $200,000, Fran.
No, I'm you know.
And so you're right.
Jim and I have been, you know.
I mean, and that wasn't about, but, and they didn't want to take the money back because they didn't want that press release,
Sure.
basically. Sometimes it's butt kissing. I mean, it's tactical, right? The strategies are there, but then what are the tactics you deploy? Sometimes you shut down HUD. Other times you get in the middle of the triangle. Mm-hmm. Depending on, you know, the strategy that you're on at that point in time. And some of us are old enough to actually kind of make this all make sense together, how the correct deployment and strategic deployment of power, starting in neighborhoods, Bob's not here anymore, but starting in neighborhoods and cities across the country, then actually culminated into a national movement for community reinvestment that we have all been living off of for a very long time. But whether the power we created and change we created way back in the early 1970s is adequate for this century, for the next decade, I don't think it actually is. I mean, we elected a Chicagoan, we meaning the country elected a Chicagoan who represented my neighborhood when he was a state senator and was our guardian angel in the state senate on anti-predatory lending legislation, and nothing has been done federally to move on the foreclosure problem at all, except for make sure the banks are whole because they're too big to fail. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but I'm at wit's end on what to do about that. And so maybe it really is time to get radical again. Boy.
Maybe it's time to take risks.
You know,
One.
so what I think about every day is something like, I mean, I know that that's the world as it exists, right? But the reality is there are, you said, 150,000 positions that are going unfilled, and so you know, when I think about 300 plus, mostly females, single family households now earning a living wage, we now have some social capital to work with to deal with lots of things in our community. And they've gone through a process, you know, where they were lower wage workers and now they're much higher wage workers. And they did that at a community organization that shares its values with them as they go through. And so I think one of the things that we need to realize right now in local communities is we have communities that are bleeding, right? And you know, the reality is that we need to bring some value to them, you know, some immediate value, right? And that immediate value happens to be the kind of value that there's some work out there that they can have, right? So I think about my brother-in-law, undocumented immigrant, who you know, has a job, right? He's hungry as heck. I mean, he's when he didn't have a job, he went out and knocked on doors for like 8 days, restaurant past restaurant past restaurant past restaurant, and he did second week again, same restaurants, and you know, sooner or later he got a job, right? That's how hungry we are about getting at the 150. Because if we can get 150,000, if we can get at as many of those as possible, then you got some social capital to actually work with in communities that you can build off of. And so I think, you know, one of the challenges, you know, that I believe we face, that we need to face right now is that you know, we want to build a social movement, you know, off of a platform of communities that, you know, are needing work, you know, are needing some of the basics, if you will, to be able to be part of it, right? And you see that we're not really a part of it yet, because you don't see it in the voting patterns, and you don't see it in even the behavior of young people. You know, you don't see it in the things that, you know, you would like to see there. And so we need to get some basics back to the people. And I think that also means a strategy to employ young people. I think if there's one thing that we need to push for is that the market has changed, and we need to create, you know, some full employment strategy for youth, you know, or some part-time employment strategy for youth, because the part-time jobs they used to have don't exist. And so thinking about social capital and how we build social capital has to be a starting point towards where we might want to go to change the direction that, you know, that we are in the country. But I'm just saying, I'm not sure we have the sufficient social capital to pull anything off right now of major proportions.
Okay, we're about to wrap up. You want to say something?
Well, we haven't really talked too much about sectoral analysis today, and maybe this is blasphemy, and maybe not, but I'm on the Milwaukee Area Workforce Investment Board, and we spent about 45 minutes last week at a committee meeting where one of the, a couple of the staff people talked about, you know, the construction trades and celebrated that 8 or 10 kids from the neighborhood got through the training program. They weren't going to get jobs, but they had gotten through the training program. And I asked how much did it cost, and I don't know, it was some outrageous amount of money. And I said, what a waste of time. We're going into a third dip in construction. If I would rather spend the time that I have getting thousands of people or trying on the road to getting jobs, decent paying jobs in new areas of work, rather than fight the same fight, which was started as a civil rights fight 30 years ago over women and minorities in the construction trades. I mean, there's a reason why we don't get those jobs, because they don't want us to get them. And there's so much power. I mean, there's such high-paying jobs. You just, are we going to continue to fight this fight to get those jobs away from white men to give to other people. And I'm going, who said that, that we were now going to be working 10 more years? I don't know if I want to spend the last 10 years of my career fighting that fight when I can get thousands of jobs for all kinds of people in renewable energies and technology, where the plants are filled with minorities and women, and they're decent jobs. I mean, do we have the time? What you just said, this is a long-term struggle, and I don't want to give up on construction, but I don't want to spend the time working on it. If you want to, God bless you. I think that you should, and other people should, because it's a worthy fight. But there's a point at which you got to say, there's other avenues, there's other areas to be able to, I'm not saying you were, I'm just using you as an example.
And we got
Right, I know. I caught you.
I just want Will to give like a quick commercial on Chicago Sustainable Industries and what the goal is there.
Sure. As a parting shot, we're really looking at this whole idea about a comprehensive approach towards being able to do what I think really lays that fertile ground and attracts the small businesses, mid-sized businesses that will be able to create sustainable long-term opportunities for jobs. It's called Chicago Sustainable Industries, and what we're doing there is identifying and really creating an opportunity to pick the horses and find out who are the companies, who are the industry sectors that are going to be around that we want to have attracted to the city of Chicago that are going to really lend value to our communities and neighborhoods. And we've been working on this, I guess, under the cover of darkness for the past 2 or 3 years, and now we've raised it to the point where we've brought it to kind of public concern. And we have a fantastic brain trust from around the city, a couple of individuals from outside of the city and nationally who are coming in and meeting with us to begin to kind of talk through what are the things and policies necessary for land use that will make our city more attractive.
Manufacturing.
This is specifically for manufacturing. What are the business resources necessary to help these companies flourish and develop and grow? What are we doing around innovation? What are we doing around looking forward and saying, here's where we need to concentrate our efforts to really grow manufacturing as an industry? What do we make anymore? We know that the multiplier for manufacturing is upwards of seven times. So how can we do this? How can we do it effectively? We're engaged in a very exciting conversation around that that's going to end up in recommendations to the mayor mid-September, and I guess that's the plug.
That's great. I also want to just clarify for the record that ass-kissing an individual here I meant as a tactical gift that he had worked superbly over the years, and I meant it in no way as a pejorative. Anyway, I'm not sure we accomplished anything today, but it was sort of a fun conversation. And please thank Will and Howard for being here and sharing their thoughts.
And thank you, Paul O'Connor, too, for facilitating this. Just a couple of notes to end on. Thank you very much for coming here. On behalf of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, really the Federal Reserve System, the Institute for Comprehensive Community Development, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, and the Urban Institute, we appreciate your engagement in this conversation today. But as we started with, this is only the beginning. This is only the beginning even of this discussion about labor markets in neighborhoods. But we also have a couple of other panels that we're planning. The next one is tentatively scheduled for November 17th, where we'll look at neighborhoods and housing markets. We'll be back here for that, but you'll get some messages about that. So if you did not get the original email that you got, maybe you found out about this from someone else, please make sure that either Eileen or I have your business card so that you're on the email on the invitation list for the next event. Or if there are people that you thought during the day should have been here in this room and they weren't, please let us know who those people are as well. And any other comments or anything, you do have a survey on your desks that if you have a chance to fill those out for us, that'll let us know what you really thought of the panels, both this morning and this afternoon, and those are important to us. So thank you again to this panel and to all of you for your participation, and we look forward to hearing more from you later.